Buonasera a tutti. Ricordo per chi non avesse...
Good afternoon and good evening to you all, and I would like to remind all those who are here for the first time that we have an object over there, which is exactly what it looks like. It's a gong, and it will be played by two gong players, and I invite them now to come on stage. They're two forced volunteers taken from the audience, so you may have been lucky this time, but maybe not next time, who I hope will be pleased to witness the whole procedure from the stage, and they once and only once they can interrupt once each to interrupt the speakers to ask them to clarify something or to ask for more details or make a comment or remark. So I'd like to give them the floor now. If you could briefly introduce yourselves. My name is Giulio. I'm a student of the Scientific Socioeconomic High School. My name is Rosa, and I too attend the same school and on the economic and social courses. There's the gong, and do not confuse it with the mic, but let's try it. Yes. We will be talking about hadron therapy. Hadron therapy is a very good example how fundamental physics in a certain area may have an impact on another applied research. It is interesting to see how research in one field can lead to results in another, which were not imagined when we started. But to explain and introduce this meeting, I would like to give the floor to Stefano Bagnasco. Yes, I've got a mic. Stefano Bagnasco is a member of GiovedìScienza who suggested this topic. He's also a member of the International Physics Institute, the INF. Richard Feynman, who was a genius, said that sex and science are very much the same thing. Sometimes it has practical consequences, but that's not why we do it. Physics is the fundamental science. This is not why we do it, but see what wonders we will hear about this evening when some scientists, for example, did not take the right precautions. Thank you very much. So this evening on stage we have two researchers from the Turin INFN group of Turin, Giordanengo and Fiorina. Here they are.
E lascio subito la parola a loro, mi sembra che inizi
And
Simona.
I would like to give them the floor without any further ado, and I feel that it's, if I'm right, it's Simona Giordanengo who will be first. Good evening to you all. This evening we would like to talk about hadron therapy from a physical and technological point of view, as was said. And we would also like to describe what Elisa and I do. We are researchers in physics applied to medicine, and the aim of this evening is to give people the tools to better understand the advantages and limitations of this technology through physics and technology. First of all, let us start by reminding you what hadron therapy is. It's a type of radiotherapy because it uses ionizing radiations in treating cancer. Today we would like to pay tribute to radiations. Let us forget for a moment that they're bad for us. We know instinctively, and we have Usually we feel very frightened when we talk about this because we know they damage our cells and can generate modifications in the DNA that can then become cancer and death. Why? Well, because radiations have this effect on human cells and they damage our bodies. But we once again have to marvel of their effects and ask ourselves if they can be used for other things. Let us go back. 1895, here we have the hand of Rontgen's wife. He discovered the X-rays. Here you can see the marvel, because thanks to the way in which they interact with matter, they cross it, release energy, and make it possible for us to take a photograph of the human body by absorbing the matter. So the aim of this introduction is to think of radiation as something fascinating, as it is. And after 130 years, after Rontgen's wife's hand, we have my husband's hand. He slipped on ice last week, and it was obtained a few seconds after being exposed to radiations, digital images, which are currently available within a matter of seconds. Let us now go beyond the two-dimensional one, and we have a 3D image. The 3D image, which you can see in this other radiography, is very important. Nor can we cease to marvel if we look at a heart that beats thanks to a 4D CT, because this time too, this is not a simulation, this is a real heart. The images are the result of radiation. Elisa will be talking about X-rays and the use of CT scans. This was just an introduction to think of radiation in a positive manner. This is the strength of radiation. This evening we'll be using the word strength or force because we want to have trust in them. I decided to open with this tribute also to a great woman, a woman who started using radiation in medicine. She was born 150 years ago. This year, 2017, is the 150th anniversary of Maria Sklodowska, better known as Marie Curie. She is a symbol of researcher. Any researcher, man or woman, when they think of Marie Curie, they think of that passion and the results that were obtained. She was closed in a lab because her aim was that of understanding, investigating. She was very involved in chemistry and physics, and we will see the unique results that she obtained as a researcher and as a woman. Unfortunately, Marie Curie lived in Poland, occupied by the Russians. She was a woman and had a very sad life, and in fact she had to study in an underground university because as I was saying, women were banned from university, but that notwithstanding, she studied, she worked, saved money, she paid also, because she was the fifth of five children, she worked and paid for her sister to study, and then her sister paid for her. She went to Paris, where she graduated from the Sorbonne in physics and mathematics. In 3 years, she took 2 degrees. In Paris, she also was lucky to meet another extraordinary physicist, Pierre Curie, who shared the lab with her, but also shared life with her. They got married, and Marie Curie, it's her married name, and they became a scientific team. In those years, those were the years of the discovery of the X-rays in 1895-96. Another French physicist, Henri Becquerel, had observed the radiation from uranium. So the Curies continued to study on, and jointly they were awarded the Nobel Prize. Marie Curie was the first woman to ever win a Nobel Prize. Initially, only Pierre and Henri were awarded, but the husband said that no, his wife had given a fundamental contribution. So in 1903, they were jointly awarded the prize, while in 1911, she received another Nobel Prize. Her husband had died, and she devoted herself to research, and she won her second Nobel Prize in another discipline, unique, 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different areas. Why am I talking about Marie Curie? Because she started using radiation in medicine. In fact, she created a mobile radiology unit during World War I. So with Marie Curie, we have the beginning of medicine as we know it today, that can use radiation for diagnosis and for treatment. I would like to now conclude with this tribute to Marie Curie, who died in 1934, probably also due to radiation. And now let us enter the debate on the current use of radiation. We started from Marie Curie, but now let's talk about what is happening. First of all, an intuitive concept. Marie Curie started studying the effects of radiations on human tissues and tumors or cancer. So we know that they're dose dependent. Dose, the physical dose, is a certain amount of energy which is released within a certain amount of matter. As you can see, there is a first formula, and we had put 3 formula which are physicists' everyday work and the way in which we can describe all the phenomena that physics tries to describe. So this is one of the many which have to do with medical physics and tells us that a dose released in a certain matter is related to the intensity of the radiation and to the amount of matter. When we talk about the effects of radiation, we have to talk about a biological effect, since these radiation can damage, we know, or cause modifications to the cells to the point that they can also cause cell death, but these effects depend on the type of tissue that is radiated. This is very important in radiotherapy because we exploit the fact that some of the tissues if they are diseased, they react differently than healthy tissues. We have the healthy cells that are oxygenated too and that are able to repair the impact of radiation more easily. So the first important aspect is the dose, and to talk about what we term a biological dose, which depends on the type of tissue, which is the target, and the radiation. Radiation may cause different type of damages that depend on the dose too. The first damage which is repaired is when only one strand of the DNA is damaged, broken by the radiation, and the cell is able to damage it. Likewise, when there are two filaments at a certain distance, while if we manage to cause the breakage of two contiguous strands, or two strands in a contiguous place, then we have cell death. This clearly depends on the type of radiation too. So X-rays can cause this damage, a repairable damage, if administered at a lower dose, but at the same dose you can see that X-rays only cause damage one of the strands, while protons that have a mass, therefore are hadrons, manage or have a biological impact that is bigger than the X-rays. And then we have carbon ions that are biologically much more effective because their density of ionization is greater. They release energy within the DNA molecule, so much so that they cause cell death. Also, in the radiosensitive cells that are called such, or called radiosensitive, because they don't die with the effect of X-rays. If now we wish to see the effect of an ion on the cell, to understand the process whereby cells repair themselves, you'll see that at a certain point you will see some luminous traces, some tracing. Why do cells, or how do cells repair? There are proteins that will act as soon as there is damage, and they run to repair the molecule. Normally, before the radiation passes, these were ions. The proteins were not visible and were distributed in an even way, and they have been colored so that you can see them. After the damage, they immediately cluster around the damaged area to repair it. Well, this is an introduction as far as the biological effect is concerned. A biological effect on tissues which depends on the type of tissue, but we also have another very important feature of hadrons, which is the way in which they interact and release their energy. This is a physical feature which makes them best suited to treatment. I'm now going to be talking about X-rays. When they interact with tissues, release most of their energy in the first centimeters. The effect on cells is proportional to the energy released. So, if we have a cancer in depth, most of the energy, unfortunately, is released on the surface. What does traditional X-ray do when using X-rays? It comes from various directions, so the maximum dose is concentrated at the center. This is the strength of the X-rays, or the way in which you can use this radiation. It comes from various angulations or various angles, but you see that the whole blue area receives a dose which is released onto healthy tissue. Now let us go and see what hadrons are and what their strength is. They're subatomical, non-elementary particles, and they undergo strong interaction. The ones which we most use in medicine are carbon ions and hydrogen ions. Why did we think that they could be used as treatment? because of one of their properties and the way in which they deposit dose in tissue. For example, compared to photons, they release most of their energy where they stop. So thanks to their charge and to their mass, the maximum release of energy exists where they stop. You remember here that we had an X-ray curve where the energy was released right at the beginning, while with hadrons it's the opposite. You see, there's a very low release, and where they stop, there's the maximum ionization energy. So they damage the DNA of the cells that they hit there in an irrecoverable way. Now, the other thing is that they stop. We haven't got any dose beyond the peak. This is a great advantage because it does not go anywhere beyond the cancer. Why are hadrons, therefore, a winning solution? They make it possible to save healthy tissues, because if they are guided, if they are planned carefully, they will stop where we want them to stop. So in this case, the problem is not speed, but the winning solution is the ability to stop where we want them to stop. Here you can see a beam is very narrow, and it's like a paintbrush, which we use to paint or to release the dose alongside the target. Here you will observe the method with which the dose is released. To go in depth, you have to increase the energy. If the cancer is very much in depth, here you can see that every dot is a certain amount, a certain dose, a certain number of particles. This beam is painted, so to speak, on the cancer target using magnets that use the fact that they are magnetized. This is a use of physics in medicine. The physicists can use this, are aware of the mechanism whereby a charged particle can be deviated in a magnetic field, and it is used to correctly generate the beam of the accelerators thanks to these physical properties to irradiate the cancer like the one we saw. If we use two techniques with the X-rays, you can see that a lot of the dose is released in the surrounding tissues, while if we use the protons, we have a certain dose onto health tissues, but it's a very small one, and we know that if it's small, then our tissues can repair it, because the balance between dose, cell death, and repair is in our favor. It's not always, though, however, an advantage to have such a small beam, because one of the problems with hadrons is moving cancers. If we have an organ that moves, it's very difficult to synchronize the beam with the movement of the organ. Elisa will be showing an example of a project which tries to address this problem. Now let us move on to another aspect. We've seen two fundamental aspects. One is a greater biological effectiveness and a physical property which makes it possible to release the dose where we want it to be released. Now let us move on to the technological problem. To accelerate hadrons as compared to photons requires a more complex machinery. An accelerator of particles, an extraction line. Once particles have been accelerated, because they must be released before hitting the patient, we have to have magnets to move the beam and to aim it carefully, and then we have to control the dose. So the main accelerators used the linear accelerators, which are short and compact and have a finite one, so we only use it to generate photons, and we have them in all hospitals. Quite small. Can be used in hospitals. While if we want to accelerate hadrons, we need circular hadrons, because we need an ideally infinite, therefore very long path, so that they can reach the necessary energy. There are two types of accelerators. One is the cyclotron, which is the most compact ones, but you can only accelerate protons. We saw that carbon ions are better, and they're complementary because it means that you can also treat radioresistant cancer, so the cyclotron is optimal. And it's still relatively small, 4 to 5 meters. But you could only accelerate protons. The synchrotron is a more complex machinery. It has a diameter of 27 meters, which is a circumference of 78, but this is a synchrotron for therapy, because CERN also has a synchrotron, but it's much bigger. This was optimized for the type of energy that we need for its clinical use, which is much smaller. But that notwithstanding, it requires a very complicated and large machine. Here in this video, you will see how a synchrotron works. First of all, there has to be a source. Particles must be created. In this video, you will see that at a certain point, these two boxes at the center will become lighter. This is the canal one, and that is where they become sources of ions. Here, this is a linear accelerator. The first part, the first acceleration is linear. The particles enter. This is a magnetic dipole that deviates the beam. The beam enters the ring of the synchrotron and starts to be accelerated every time it goes round in that ring through a cavity which is called radio frequency. It receives the energy which increases. Well, there's an electric field that pushes it and increases its energy. As time goes by, its energy increases until you reach the desired level. When you reach the desired level, you then move on to the treatment chambers. Here you can see the arrival. And this is the canal hall, and this is the room where patients are treated, and these are where the ions are channeled to. You'll understand from this video how complex it is. Here you can see the beam coming from above, and then we will see all the details. This is part of the great and advanced technology which is necessary for hadron therapy. It's very expensive at the time. Now, because we need very complex machines that are very expensive also to maintain and to manage, much more than, say, if we were using X-rays. Now, let us move on a second. I was mentioning earlier on that thanks to these magnets of the magnetic fields, we can shift the beam. And here you can see another image that gives you an idea of how we can channel it. The last step, which is necessary, and which personally I've been involved in the Turin medical physics group, is that little bit just before the patient. That is to say, monitoring measurements. We'll see it towards the end. So before the patient receives the beam, or while we're sending it, we have to measure in real time exactly what we're doing. And this is done through particle detectors, and thanks to the charge which is released, will tell us what features the beam has. hadron therapy in Italy is practiced in 3 centers. If you consider that in the whole of Europe there are 17 and that 3 of them are in Italy, we have a very positive record in this case, and we must be very pleased and proud. I've put the INFN centers in these centers here. We started in Catania in 2002, as you can see in the slide. Then 2011, the Pavia CNAO started, where there is a synchrotron that can accelerate both protons and carbon ions. And then the third is in Trento, which is in a private center, a Belgium company, while Pavia and Catania are the result of research of the INFN of the university. As I was mentioning, the first treatments were carried out in Catania, and there they only treat eye cancers, while CNAO in Pavia is the result of the idea and the perseverance of Ugo Amaldi, a great Italian physicist, who was the first to develop or to want a center with an accelerator. He developed the first synchrotron project, and if we have the CNAO in Pavia, it's thanks to Ugo Amaldi. And it was the first center, the first dedicated center for medical use. This is different from using an accelerator for physics in medicine, while this one was designed and was dedicated to clinical use. As you can see, since 1991, after 20 years, a clinical activity started using protons, and then a year later with carbon ions. CNAO is also a research center, so as well as clinical treatment, it carries out clinical and radiobiological research. Here you can see 2 of the halls. Currently, 1,550 patients have been treated, and an experimental hall is being built because research is essential. This is our point of arrival, but there's still a lot to be done, and there are many things we can do to improve them. While the last center, this is the Trento one, as you can see from the symbol, it's by a company, and again, it's a rotating gantry. The final part, which is the one that I have been involved in, a product of the University of Turin and the INFN, is the dose monitoring system. The design, the manufacturing, the testing, the experimentation were all carried out at the CNAO, and from 2006 to 2013. Well, this is an image of what a particle detector shows. It makes it possible to measure the beam in real time and give us an image of what is happening. Clearly, this is not where we stop. This is this is our... Oh, right, I've been interrupted. On my last slide, I was stopped. There's a question. Yes, I thought that maybe I would understand it, but with traditional treatment, the patient also has contrast medium administered for a greater effectiveness. Do you use contrast medium with this type of treatment? And how many cancers will it be used for? Well, as far as the contrast medium, there are no protocols, clinical authorized protocols for a contrast medium. It is used very often in the diagnostic phase, and so in a phase which is not the treatment. Currently, we are not using contrast media to, for example, there are studies on nanoparticles, that go to see how the injection of nanoparticles in cancer may increase the effectiveness, and therefore you can reduce the dose, because this is the end result. This is the aim, identifying the dose which has a minimal effect on surrounding tissues and a maximum effect on the target. The following question was that on the patients and on which type of cancers you would use it. I don't know how many more cancers we would use it for. We use carbon ions to treat radioresistant cancers, that is to say cancers that do not react to X-ray radiations or proton radiations, so a series of cancers that otherwise could not be treated. Others are the ones that are very deep and where surgery is not effective, and where radiation would mean that you affect too many and too much of the healthy tissue. And then pediatric tissues where the impact of dose on the body is very unbalanced, and therefore we use this new technique. I can't give you the facts and figures, but there are, at this particular moment, hadron therapy is a part of what in Italy we call the LEAs, that is to say essential treatment, because with 30 different protocols. At CNAO there are 30 protocols, and it means that you can treat these patients in a more effective way than surgery, chemotherapy, or other treatments. It's an additional, it does not treatment, it does not replace it. As I was saying at the beginning, it's an additional tool. Figures are very difficult to give because, for example, there are treatments for cancers that could not otherwise be treated, while others are combined with radiotherapy. It's a bit difficult question, and really you need a clinical answer to it. Thank you. When Simona Giordanengo talking about the CNAO, she is talking about the Pavia Center, the National Center for Oncological Treatment. It's very interesting to go and check its website. Well, tonight we're talking about the technology and the science upstream. Thank you very much, Giordanengo. And now the floor to Elisa Fiorina. She'll be talking more specifically about what the patient does. That is to say, how these hadrons are used and how you monitor its effectiveness. Simona explain what the strength of hadron therapy is. That is to say, how you can use these hadrons to treat patients, and accompanied you in the accelerators and showed you how the INFN in Turin contributed to develop all those systems to govern and channel this beam. I will take you out of there and I will bring you to the hadron therapy main door, which is the patient's. A patient arrives to our center with a diagnosis. It is a cancer diagnosis, and he or she has a long route. Along this route, they will meet with various figures, doctors, medical physicists, and with radiology engineers. Are there, maybe not now, or will they exist, ways to recognize the well, for example, what I mean is, can you have an app on a smartphone that can sniff a tumor out? That is to say, you're suggesting a cell phone and the app will diagnose it, sniff it out, monitoring it at a distance. Yeah, the fear is that smartphones will cause cancer. Well, that's a bit too futuristic, but possibly. In the course of what I'm explaining, you'll see what the various steps are in diagnosis. So I will be talking about all the tools and technologies that are used and all the technology which underlies the world of hadron therapy. And then we'll see whether a smartphone is enough or not. So I was saying that there are various members of staff that will help the patient both in planning the treatment, so you need time to understand whether this pathology can be treated in an effective manner by hadrontherapy, and how the treatment can be carried out and whether it will be effective. Then these figures will also be with the patient in the course of hadron therapy. Hadron therapy takes several weeks, so when the patient starts, they have 4 to 6 weeks ahead of them. The treatment consists of daily treatments. They don't last long, a few minutes, but you have to prepare the patient, as I will show you in a minute. At the end of the treatment, there are a series of controls, a protocol, to see whether this patient has been cured or not. And Simona has mentioned the type of technology that we use to accelerate hadrons and the systems for the release of the energy, how this beam is released and monitored. I will be talking about the other techniques based on physics that are used in the other phases. So, first of all, we have medical imaging, treatment planning, and monitoring. What is medical imaging? They're all those tools based on physical principles and ionizing radiation specifically that make it possible to see within the human body to treat them better. They improve the doctor's diagnostic skills because it means that the doctors may have more technology to use and which will enable him or her to identify the disease of the patient. Furthermore, medical imaging can be used to plan treatment and to monitor it. Let us say that medical imaging can be broken down into two groups. First of all, morphological imaging and then functional imaging. As you can see from these examples, morphological imaging looks for differences. So you look at the patient's anatomical structure and try to find or identify differences with healthy patients. X-rays, CT or CAT, CAT scans, and nuclear magnetic resonance. As well as morphology differences, functional imaging also looks at differences in how it works, and I will be talking about positron emission tomography, which is normally known as PET. As Simona mentioned, all started with the discovery of X-rays in 1895. This discovery was really outstanding because the discoverer or the inventor, who discovered it a bit by chance. It was serendipity, as many of the discoveries are in science. He didn't patent it, but this means that a few months after his discovery, the first radiology units were available, and they were used to diagnose fractures, weapon wounds or firearm wounds, to see if there were any bullets and where they were. X-rays became very soon a widespread imaging technique. To have an X-ray, you need a tube, a radiogenous tube. It's a vacuum with two electrodes, an anode and a cathode, and a filament in between. As power or electricity goes through the filament, it emits electrons because of thermionic effects. These are accelerated because they are charged particles, as Simona mentioned, for protons, and charged particles are accelerated by a differential potential, and when they impact on it, they emit. When they hit it, they are called X-ray. They were called X because we didn't know what type of rays they were, and then they maintained the label. If you go to a hospital to have an X-ray, you'll find an instrument such as this one. In this arm, there is something which greatly resembles this tube, and the patient is put in the middle, while here you can see a digital detector or a film. Now here you can see that X-rays are the highest energy as opposed to the visible. How do they interact with our body? Why is it that if we're invested by X-rays, we have an X-ray? The reason is that these rays interact with our body in relation to the density of the structures which they cross. So when, say, they go through a bone, they are weaker than when they come out than when they go through, say, a muscle or our lungs. As an example, radiography is a very simple test because it gives a two-dimensional test, so all the anatomical structures are flattened out on one plane. The advantage is that it gives the patient a very low dose, so referring to what Simona was saying, low dose means also low side effects in the long term. It's cheap. This means that it can be used as a test, and it can be part of screening tests. In Italy, as many of you know, there is a screening program for women whose breasts are screened between 50 and 69, and every 2 years a mammography is offered. With this procedure, we can have early diagnosis of nodules when they cannot yet be felt. In Italy, we have 80–90% of women who were diagnosed with carcinoma that is cured, not just treated, precisely because the cancer is detected in a very early phase when it can be cured. As you will observe from the image that is seen here, it is a 2D image. So here you can see that there is a nodule. We can identify it. We can carry out a biopsy, but we don't know what the volume of this nodule is. As a result, we lack information that is very important as radiotherapy, as Simona showed you, because we must know what the volume of the cancer is, and then you have to use a paintbrush, so to speak, that is to say, the hadron beam. So we need a 3D image, and CTs are the answer. These were discovered by Hounsfield in 1971, and ever since the first CT that you can see here, it's always a brain, it's the skull. Today we have a much better resolution, so great progress has been made since 1971 in the use of this image. How does it work? Well, it can be summarized as follows. It's as if we were giving the patient a number of different X-rays from different points of view, and then you recreate a 3D image. This is a machine for a CT scan. Here you see a ring. It's a ring with photon detectors. The ring with the X-rays turns round the patient, and the bed the patient is on progressively enters the ring of detectors. Here you can see the trajectory around the patient so that we're able to cover all the area we wish to scan. Here you can see a sketch. Here you have 2 lungs. The morphology of the patient is clear if you look at the various slices. How do you then recreate the image to make it a 3D? I'm going to try and give you an outline, a brief idea of what happens, but clearly there is a lot of mathematics behind it and a lot of optimization and a bit of explanation that I'm going to skip over. I'm going to give you a rather oversimplified example. Let us say here we have a square, cubic objects with inside it some objects of different densities. And now imagine that we're going to take a radiography from this point of view. Here we will have a different gray. We will be compressing all the information along each trajectory of the photons, and this will give us an image of radiography. But if we then shift the tube, we can get it to rotate around the objects, then we have different types of radiographies. Here it's to reproject it backwards. In fact, we call them retroprojection algorithms. So we reproject the image and see the different intensity of the objects. As a result, we obtain an image where the intensity is proportional to density. Let me just show you what happens in the lower section in an animation, and you see what happens with the patient. This is a CT scan. Every cube of these images contains a number. This number has been called Hounsfield unit in honor of Hounsfield. What you can see is every substance is associated to a number. So, for example, air is minus 1,000. These are the lungs of our patient. The bone is plus 700 and it's white. Here you can see it. Backbone, this is the liver, heart, kidneys. Here you can see all the organs of our patient. Now, what we can't really see with a CT scan is the difference amongst the soft tissues. What you can't see with CT scans is the difference among the soft tissues. So if, on the other hand, we want to go more in depth and understand what type of tissue, we have the difference between heart, liver, or in the brain between white and gray matter, then we have to change the instrument. And the answer is in magnetic resonance. Magnetic resonance is a completely different imaging technique because it does not use ionizing radiation, which is what we've spoken about so far, but is based on the interaction between a magnetic field and a radio frequency field with our body, that is to say, with the nuclear spin of the matter that makes us up. In this way, in practice, we release with radio frequency some energy to the nuclei that are present in the tissues, and they react or give back a radio frequency signal. This is, in a nutshell, a very complex technique, but to help you understand how fascinating and complex it is, this is an example which will explain much better than I have with words. If we have a patient and we have a CT scan, say to the brain, we have an image which is like this, and I think that you all know about it and you've learned what it is. Here there are bones. These are 2 holes where we have fluid in our brain, the cerebral spinal one, and the rest of it is soft tissue because it's gray matter. If the same patient has a magnetic resonance, we have a series of images which are in fact more complex than the ones you can see. If you take this one, you can see that the white matter is white and the gray matter is gray, and then in black you have the fluid. So I understand much more in detail the the differences amongst the various tissues. Another feature of the magnetic resonance is that it can study the connections in our body. So here you can see there are fibers that are called neuronal axons that we can follow, or, and this is the last case, this is a functional magnetic resonance, and we ask patient to move his or her left hand, and here you can see that there is activity that is in orange-red that corresponds to the right lobe, because as you know, it's the right lobe that governs the left hand. Thanks to these images, that is to say a functional image, we're moving towards another group of imaging techniques which I mentioned at the beginning, that is functional imaging. As for oncology or cancer treatment is concerned, the positron emission tomography, PET, is the one that we use most. That is to say, it is a test that helps us identify healthy from cancer tumors thanks to the metabolism that they have. As you all know, tumor cells have an accelerated metabolism. If you have an accelerated metabolism, it means that you need more sugars, and the way to see it, which was identified by doctors and physicists who developed these machines, is to take sugars, put an atom inside it, which in the case of this radio tracing is fluoride 18, which decays. So it's in a radioactive isotope. The patient is then injected with this radio tracer, this marker, and then the patient is monitored, and the decay is monitored. How does the decay take place? Well, the substance emits a positron. It's the different twin of electron, because it's like electrons, but it's positive. And a positron that is emitted, what does it do? Well, it goes into the surrounding tissues, a very small space, and then there is annihilation with an electron present in the matter. When a positron and electron meet, they generate two photons with a very specific energy that move in opposite directions. So you have two photons that are on the same line, and if we have a patient in a ring of photon detectors, you can imagine how these 2 points, these two photons, can draw a line. If you put together all the lines emitted by this patient, we have a 3D image with a lot more mathematics and a lot more complicated stuff. You can see the result. This is a scanner that is used in hospitals currently, and it is not a mere PET, but it's a PET plus CT. If we have a PET, we've got this one at the center. You can see there are blobs to interpret these blobs, which are the dark ones. A dark means that there is more sugar, more activity, the higher metabolism rate. Well, then at that point we also need anatomical information, which has to be put together, and that's the CT scan. If we use the blended image of these two techniques, PET and CT, we see that this activity is the brain of the patient, this is the heart, so luckily the heart's there, and this is the bladder, which is active, that is to say is releasing the radio tracer because it's expelled by the kidneys. We also see this little dot here that was not clearly visible in the morphological image, but clearly in the functional image it highlights a disease. Now that we've seen how all these images, the morphological and functional images, can give us information on the pathology of the patient and on the size and volume which they are, we can now move on to how you plan treatment. We have the anatomy of the patient to start with. This is very important to plan treatment. Then the second is the radiation setup, that is to say, the type of accelerator we have, the type of parameters that we can modify, how many fields. Simona showed you that the patient is treated from different points. All these things are important, all the parameters of how the treatment is carried out. And then there is the medical prescription. That means that you identify the volume or the area that has to be irradiated, that we will call target. And here you can see it, which is pinkish and yellow. And then we can identify all the anatomical parts that are more sensitive to dose, which are called the at risk. Here you see, for example, eyes and the lens and the optical nerve. We then input all the information together, and the result as an output is the following information. We have a 3D image of the dose that will be administered to the patient, and all the information which is necessary for the treatment. It's as if we'd put all the ingredients on one side, the planning system on the other for the treatment, and therefore we have the best possible recipe, so to speak, for treatment. Here you can see the results of different treatment plans on the same patient. Here you can see it's the same target area, and we're imagining different treatment radiation solutions. Here we have traditional X-rays, carbon ions and protons. You will observe how the target is we give the medical dose in 3 cases, but for example, the brain stem is not affected in the last example. Now we've understood that we need a 3D image for hadron therapy because it is necessary to identify the tumor dose. And here you can see the reason. This is Simona's slide. We want hadrons to stop within the tumor or cancer because otherwise it means we haven't been able to manage it. Hadron techniques are very strong, but they have to be managed or channeled. Here you can see in orange, this is the ideal treatment that we would like to have, but for some reason there might be something which is changed, say on the path of our hadrons, so that our dose is then shifted. And at that point, we have an underdosage in the cancer and an overdosing of healthy tissues. Now, is the overdosing of healthy tissues worse or better? Well, neither must happen, neither the underdosing of the cancer cells nor the overdosing of the healthy tissues. So we must control both the position of the patient, the movement of the organs, because maybe, I don't know, the cancer is in the chest and therefore moves with the patient's breathing. And also we must take into consideration and monitor anatomical changes in the patient. This means that while we're doing the treatment, we have to check where the hadrons stop so as to get them to stop within the cancer every time. As for the positioning of the patient, there are some standard procedures. For example, the patient is put on the bed, but there's a mask of thermoplastic material on their face so they can't move, and the mask which is positioned the first time when you plan with the CT scan the first time is then repositioned every day on the patient during treatment. Here we are inside a CNAO treatment chamber when the patient is, in this case, it's not a real patient but a dummy. Here you have these 2 tubes that come out of the system. This is a radiogenous tube, and this is the photon detector. Here there's another one. In this way, you can have a double radiography. This double radiography is then compared with the patient's CT scan, which was used to plan treatment, and the position of the patient is then checked. So the treatment starts only if the patient is in the correct position. In the case of moving organs, say with breathing, and Simona showed you something similar, you have a target which is constantly moving. This is a situation which, with hadron therapy, is a research field. We're trying to deal with it because you see how it is moving within the same treatment. So in time, how it moves, which is the breathing process of the patient. Furthermore, here you can see how it moves over time. Given that the treatment lasts a month and a half, the cancer moves. And it's here, if we only chose 1 week and we based our results on that, we would be mistaken. As a result, a system such as this was very important. On the patient's chest, we have points of reference that can be seen outside, and modeling the movement of the patient, they are then matched with the position. This is how we are trying to move towards a type of adapted hadron therapy, that is to say, treatment changes as we do it. We reposition it because there is something which forces me to modify it. As for morphological changes during treatment, I have brought you this example. This is a treatment to the paranasal sinuses, which are usually full of air. So there was air in them, but during treatment, the patient had had a radio-induced sinusitis, that is to say the tissue was inflamed and there was more liquid. So you can see again in the CT scan, we have more gray liquid. Now, given that there is a change in the morphology, it means that our treatment, our particles have a different density, and therefore, in the case of our patients, they will stop earlier on. What can you do without giving a patient a CT scan again and again? This is the aim of the INSIDE project. These are 2 detectors, one below the patient's head, one above. They are 2 PET scan detectors, that is to say that they can see the emission of positrons and their annihilation. And how does it work? Well, when the hadrons go through the patient's body, they generate naturally, due to nuclear interaction, they generate radioactive isotopes that decay very quickly. It's not like the FTG, which has a longer time of decay. They decay within minutes, so it's limited to the radiation phase. And these isotopes decay, as I was saying. They are detected with these detectors, and where they were produced is obviously related to where the hadrons, the primary hadrons, went through. The INSIDE project is currently in the CNAO in Pavia, and in December 2016 we gathered the data on the first patients. Currently we're fine-tuning it, and in 2018 there will be a clinical trial. Certain pathologies were used, and we will be trying to see what the effectiveness of this system is on various patients. Now I will show you the results that were obtained on our first patient. You will observe in time. Here you will see data and the simulation, which is what we expect as time goes by. Here they're the seconds of treatment, and you will see that what we measure is compatible, matches what should happen if nothing had changed with the patient. So if the patient has been correctly positioned, if there are no changes in the morphology, then this is what happened. In this case, there is not the problem of movement because we're treating a head. Fine. I've finished with this, And I would like to conclude with this slide where you can see the various technologies that Simona and I mentioned are illustrated, and here you can see a photo of the youngsters, of some of the youngsters of the group who work with us in the lab. I would like to say that I hope that I was able to explain what I said with about 1/100th of the passion that we all have for it, and I would like to thank everyone